Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. Here is what we're watching at this hour. The United States is there. President Biden's statement to allies, his reassurance to America's friends, and his promise to take on Russia and China. Live events happening this hour. Weaponizing the Justice Department, new details about how far the Trump administration went to try and hunt down leaks, and why Trump's White House counsel even had his data seized. And growing concern, the UK is delaying its reopening as a surge in cases of a more contagious COVID variant is worrying health officials there and now here at home. Thanks for being here, everybody. Happening live at this hour, President Biden is meeting with NATO allies in Brussels. The president will soon be meeting with Turkey's president on the sidelines of this summit. This is President Biden's first in-person gathering with NATO leaders, where this morning he is calling the alliance critically important and a sacred obligation, in stark contrast to his predecessor. This all comes ahead of Biden's highly anticipated meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday in Geneva. Let's begin with CNN's Jeff Zeleny. He's live in Brussels for us now. Jeff, the president has already had some tough words just today for Russia and China. What do you say?
Well, Kate, President Biden has been really repeating that message everywhere he goes throughout his European tour here about the rising aggression from Russia and the rising threats from China. And he's doing the same thing here at NATO headquarters. He's in meetings right now behind me here at NATO headquarters. The meetings are running long, we're told, perhaps an hour long or so. So that is generally a sign when world leaders get together, some 30 of them or so here. They are having a variety of discussions on a variety of things, but Russia and China, of course, key among them. But the biggest message here that President Biden is trying to convey is that he believes in this transatlantic alliance. He is trying to reaffirm Americans' commitment to this military alliance, of course, that President Trump, when he was in office, once threatened to remove the U.S. from NATO. But earlier today, as President Biden arrived here, he said this.
There is a growing recognition over the last couple of years that we have new challenges. And we have Russia that is not acting in a way that is consistent with what we had hoped, and as well as China. But I want to make it clear, NATO is critically important for U.S. interest in and of itself. If there weren't one, we'd have to invent one.
So President Biden clearly trying to steer the conversation. And for the first time, when a NATO releases a strategic statement, really, of their meeting and plans here, it will mention the rising threat and concern of China. So that is essential. But Kate, everything is leading up to the meeting on Wednesday in Geneva with Vladimir Putin. I am told that President Biden is really having a conversation with every leader he meets here, and indeed over the weekend, talking about Putin and sort of getting some input here. So he's trying to build a consensus as he moves into Geneva on Wednesday. But behind the scenes, when he's not meeting with world leaders, he's preparing for that summit. Kate?
Absolutely. Jeff, thanks for the reporting. Really appreciate it. For more, joining me now is CNN political analyst David Sanger. He's, of course, a national security correspondent for the New York Times. David, first on the meeting that's going to be happening, well, we think this hour, President Biden meeting with the Turkish President Erdogan. When it comes to a meeting with President Erdogan, it was put this way, actually, in the New York Times today, and I thought it was really, really well put. I want to read it. How do you not lose Turkey while you try to curb Erdogan? How important is the answer to that question right now?
It's pretty important because President Erdogan is certainly the problem child of NATO at this point. He has bought Russian air defense systems, hasn't fully deployed them yet, and expected the United States would continue to supply him with F-35 fighter jets, even though the Russian air system is made to defeat the F-35s. He has repressed dissent. He's closed media in Turkey. He's basically, in the Biden world of democracies versus autocracies, he's hard over on the autocracy side. But, Kate, there is no provision in the NATO charter for throwing a country out. And the U.S. couldn't afford to throw him out even if they wanted to, because he's providing some of the access, air access, we will need over Afghanistan if things go bad after the U.S. withdraws.
Let's jump ahead to what this is all building toward, right? Biden's meeting with Vladimir Putin. In a new interview with NBC News, Putin laughed when he was asked if he was a killer by the correspondent who was speaking with Keir Simmons. And also when asked, though, about the ransomware attacks that U.S. intelligence has said originated out of Russia that we've seen more and more and more of. I want to play you what Putin said.
Mr. President, are you waging a cyber war against America?
Where is the evidence? Where is proof? It's becoming farcical. We know it well. We have been accused of all kinds of things: election interference, cyber attacks, and so on and so forth. And not one time did they bother to produce any kind of evidence or proof, just unfounded accusations.
David, if this is how Putin is responding to Biden when they're face-to-face, can Biden get anywhere in terms of making, quote-unquote, progress with Russia?
It's going to be hard. You know, if you think about the past 70 years of meetings, first with Soviet leaders and then with Russian leaders, Kate, they've always been about nuclear weapons, or have had those in the background. And the thing about nuclear weapons is we've always known where they're located. We could count them, and you could see when they were launched. The problem with cyber weapons is you can't see them being developed. You can't verify whether they've been dismantled. And it's very difficult to prove, at least in a public, understandable way, where they were launched from. Now, we don't have any doubt that the SVR, the most sophisticated of the Russian intelligence agencies, was behind the SolarWinds attack, which was discovered last December against American federal agencies, against corporations. Yes. The ransomware groups, they're harder to pin down, but we know many of them are based inside Russia. But that doesn't mean the Russian government was running them, and it makes denials like this all the easier. And so how do you get to an agreement to go limit, say, the targets and so forth, if Putin won't even admit that they're harboring the hackers?
Yeah, I mean, because as one U.S. official had put it in terms of how Biden is talking about this meeting ahead of it as he's at the NATO summit, the one official described it as what he's looking for is a stable and constructive relationship with Russia, but also saying that we'll respond in the face of Russia's harmful activities. And I'm trying to figure out what really is possible here, what's stable and constructive, because it's not like the U.S. is never not having to respond to harmful actions by Russia these days.
That's right. So stable and constructive is different than we're going to reset relations. We're going to have some form of glasnost. Remember that phrase from early in the, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that we're going to develop a friendship. What he's saying is here, all we want to develop are some guardrails to keep us from escalating into a worse conflict. So that's part of the problem. But the second problem is that while we have done many things to the Russians, mostly financial sanctions after they annexed Crimea, in response to these cyber attacks, in response to the manipulation efforts in the 2016 election, the pace, the sophistication of the attacks has only increased. And whenever you talk about really raising the pain on the Russians, which would mostly mean going after their oil and gas revenue, the concern is, how do you get off that escalation ladder? What do you do when they come back harder, particularly since we live in the glassiest house, right? We live in an internet world where it's easy to get into a company, a gas pipeline, a beef manufacturer, someplace that is not particularly hardened.
The glassiest of houses. I'm going to use that. David, thank you very much. It's always good to see you. Appreciate it. Coming up for us.
Great to be here.
CNN and other top news organizations demanding answers after reporters are targeted in a secret effort by the Trump Justice Department. So many questions of what actually they were looking for, what they wanted, who knew about it. A big meeting today, and the Attorney General just spoke out for the first time on this. And there's a new man in charge in Israel, but Benjamin Netanyahu is not leaving quietly. Coming up, his parting shot and the uncertain path forward now for the country. Big breaking news just in. Attorney General Merrick Garland has just spoken out for the first time after it was revealed the Justice Department under former President Donald Trump secretly seized phone and email records of reporters at major media organizations. Massive amounts of data. Garland's statement comes just hours before he is set to meet with the leaders of CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. And it goes much further than that. CNN's Paula Reed is joining me now with more on this. Paula, tell us what the Attorney General said.
Kate, in his statement, the Attorney General says that there are important questions that need to be explored about how the Trump Justice Department went about obtaining these records. Now, just to underscore how extraordinary it is, it's highly unusual to obtain lawmakers' records like this outside of an investigation into corruption, even though, of course, the Justice Department does frequently investigate leaks. But the biggest question we have right now, Kate, is what exactly happened? Why were these records seized? Who oversaw this? Who knew what when? Former attorneys general and the deputy attorney general, they've all denied being involved in many of these record requests. Going forward, according to this statement, the deputy attorney general, Lisa Monaco, she is going to be reviewing the Justice Department's procedure for obtaining records from lawmakers like this in the future. Now, suggesting that the current procedures, whatever they may be, are inadequate, and also suggesting perhaps they were not followed in this particular case. But still so many questions. We're also reporting out another secret request for records from then White House counsel Don McGahn. Again, extraordinary to secretly obtain the records of then President Trump's top lawyer. And Apple was barred from actually disclosing this until just this last May. And at this point in our reporting, Kate, it's not clear if McGahn was the target of an investigation or if his records were swept up in a larger request related to something different. But what we're seeing is this pattern of unusual requests in what appear to, in some cases, be leak investigations. But the common thread we see in all three of these instances is that these were people that then President Trump were frustrated with, be it the Democratic lawmakers or his then White House counsel who had resisted the former president's calls to fire then special counsel. It's also very difficult to believe that when it comes to Don McGahn, that then Attorney General Jeff Sessions and then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein wouldn't have known about a request for the White House counsel's records. But in talking to sources, there are some concerns that perhaps his information was swept up, that they didn't actually know who it was, whose information they had, and that wasn't actually disclosed until Apple revealed it to their customer. Now, I've talked to a lot of former justice officials, and I said that's pretty scary, and that's going to be pretty scary to a lot of Americans. The fact that the White House counsel doesn't have much protection when it comes to his records being swept up. Now, of course, we're also investigating, reporting on the requests for records from several journalists, including our colleague Barbara Starr here at CNN. Later today, several top officials from various news organizations will be meeting with the Attorney General to discuss efforts to obtain reporters' records.
Paula, thank you so much for that. There is a lot to dig through here. Joining me right now for more, and this is CNN legal analyst Paul Callan. Paul, your reaction to the statement from the Attorney General Merrick Garland ahead of this meeting today?
Well, you know, this entire situation is quite shocking from a legal standpoint. To think that the counsel to the President of the United States, Trump's counsel, could be investigated, subpoenaed by his own Justice Department is just an indication of how dangerous the situation is. I mean, if he's investigating his own counsel, what about American citizens? What about the Congress? What about journalists around the country? This is far more dangerous than even what we saw during the Nixon administration, where he, of course, had his enemies list and he was impeached. But he was never really charged with an abuse of the subpoena power to this extent.
You know, Speaker Pelosi has said that it is beyond belief, in her view, that Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Attorney General Bill Barr, under Trump, of course, did not know about these subpoenas and this effort. Do you agree?
Yeah, it is quite shocking that would be the case. But just in terms of the way the American power system and the American government is structured, you have to remember that the president is the chief law enforcement officer in the country, and the Justice Department works for him. And his discretion is very, very wide, and he's only checked by the courts. But the courts have to know that it's going on. And sometimes subpoenas are issued without judges even knowing about it. Because remember, prosecutors have the right to issue subpoenas without judicial consent in many situations. So when you have a president who's abusing his power, the system, the way it's set up now, it's very difficult to control that except through impeachment or not reelecting him.
Well, and these secret courts are a category all of their own as well. I mean, and seemingly every day we are learning of new subpoenas that this is getting broader and wider. And it's what's still not clear, and Paula was kind of speaking to this, is who really was being targeted, why they were being targeted. They were being targeted for a subpoena, but are they the target of an investigation? We know in Barbara Starr's circumstances, we know that she was not a target of an investigation. Why isn't the Justice Department explaining, why can't the Justice Department explain the circumstances around this more?
Well, certainly the Justice Department could explain it if they want to. There's nothing prohibiting that, but the Justice Department likes to hold on to its ability to conduct secret investigations. Sometimes you're investigating intelligence matters. Sometimes you're investigating mob figures. And for instance, if you're looking at their bank records or other kinds of records, you certainly don't want them to know that you're doing that as you're putting the case together. But of course, in the situation that we have here, where journalists like Barbara Starr and other people who kind of work for the public interest, we always hope, unlike mob figures, they're being treated pretty much the same way. And, you know, the CNN example is a great example. Counsel to CNN, David Vigilante, was issued a subpoena, and he was gagged. The subpoena said he couldn't even tell Barbara Starr or others at the network that the subpoena had been issued. And this went on for a long period of time. And by the way, the penalty for violating that gag order could be years in prison. It could be a felony violation. So this is an area where you can have tremendous abuse of power. And I would hope the Justice Department will be more open about what went on in this case and whether we need more controls in these kinds of investigations.
Yeah, what the controls would be, what policy change could be happening. It might be necessary in the Justice Department after all of this comes to light. Paul, thank you very much. Still ahead for us, a potential nuclear disaster brewing in China. What the U.S. government is watching now as some warn of an imminent radiological threat. We'll be right back. It is a new day in Israel and a new path forward for the country. This morning, Israel's new government is getting to work after ousting the country's longest-serving prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. But there are real questions about how the new prime minister, Naftali Bennett, is going to move forward with his fragile coalition. Netanyahu, for his part this morning, is vowing to topple what he is calling a fraudulent government. It should sound familiar. CNN's Oren Lieberman is live in Jerusalem with the very latest. Oren, Bennett is making clear that he wants to unite the nation. How is he going to do that?
Well, he has the most diverse coalition in Israel's history, Kate. 8 different parties from the right wing, the left wing, and the first Arab party to participate in an Israeli government. He has to unite this coalition. He has to find common ground, for example, for a budget, to work on the cost of housing, state, and religion. All of these central issues that effectively have been pushed to the side, this is what his coalition is built to deal with. This is how he will try to make a difference in what he calls a politics of unity, of working together in agreement instead of discord and division. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu, in his last speech as prime minister and his first speech as head of the opposition, said he would take down what he called a weak and dangerous government. He has been criticized in the past for sacrificing the U.S.-Israel relationship, especially the relationship of Israel and the Democrats, for his own political gain. That is criticism he's facing once again after he basically accused the Biden administration of going into this nuclear deal with Iran once again and said he would work to stop it and that nobody else can do it but him.
The American administration asked me not to make public our disagreements on the nuclear deal, but with all due respect to our great friend and to my personal friend for 40 years, President Joe Biden, I will not behave that way.
As for how different this relationship already looks between the U.S. and Israel, we're seeing it just hours after Naftali Bennett's swearing in, a congratulatory message from President Joe Biden, congratulatory messages as well from the Secretary of State and Defense Secretary, then the first phone call between Biden and Bennett. That coming a short time after the swearing in. In contrast, it took Biden nearly a month to call Benjamin Netanyahu after he was sworn in. So, Kate, you're already seeing the differences between the U.S. and Israel as well as others.
Absolutely. Orrin, thank you very much. I want to turn now to a CNN exclusive report. CNN is learning that the U.S. government is assessing a possible leak at a Chinese nuclear plant. A French company that partly owns the plant and helps operate it is warning now of an imminent radiological threat. CNN's David Culver is joining me now. He is live in Shanghai with these exclusive details. David, tell us more of your reporting.
Kate, it's a bit frightening when you hear those words, imminent radiological threat. Now, those words come from a waiver of assistance application that CNN's Zachary Cohen discovered through sources that came from this French company that, as you point out, jointly operates the Chinese nuclear power plant. Let me show you where this is happening. It's in the south of China. It's Guangdong province, a province with more than 120 million people. So it is a heavily populated and dense area. And what we've learned is that there is an increase in the radiation there. According to the sources talking to CNN, it's an increase in fission gas, which is a natural byproduct that includes xenon, which is radiological. Now, the concern is the limits. According to that document, they accuse, the French that is, that cooperate that plant, the Chinese of raising the safety limits and thereby causing potential harm. So that's the concern that's playing out right now. Now, we, of course, have reached out to the Chinese officials, the foreign ministry, along with authorities in Guangdong province. We've not yet heard back. We should note it's a long holiday weekend that's coming to an end here, so perhaps within the next 24 hours they will respond to this. The plant has responded, as well as the French company that helps run it. They consider this to be under control in sorts, as they're sort of paraphrasing this. They suggest, Kate, that this is something that they can maintain, that they will find a resolution to it, and that it is operating within the safety parameters. The big issue is, though, lack of transparency that we've seen with the Chinese in past incidents. We're wondering where this will go from here. It's going to be closely monitored, not only by us, but of course, U.S. officials keeping an eye on this, Kate.
Yeah, as always, transparency is a huge issue here. Once again, David, thank you very much for that reporting. Coming up for us, new concerns about a COVID variant surging right now in the United Kingdom. Why it is leading officials there to likely delay their reopening plans, and what this now means for the United States. At this hour, England's long-awaited reopening plans may be on hold amid a wave of new coronavirus infections. The spike in cases is linked to the highly contagious Delta variant that is now the dominant strain in the UK. CNN's Scott McLean is live in London. He's been following this for us. Scott, how bad is it there?
Hey, Kate. Well, the numbers are pretty small still, less than 10 deaths in the last 24 hours, less than 8,000 cases. The problem is that at least when it comes to the case count, well, they have about doubled in just the past 2 weeks. So now the government, as you mentioned, is expected to delay the final phase of reopening by about 4 weeks. And not everybody is happy about it. You can probably hear the protesters just outside the gates here at Downing Street that are making their voice heard about an issue that hasn't even officially been announced by the government just yet. That final phase of reopening would allow sports venues to operate at full capacities, theaters to do the same, nightclubs to reopening, and all of the limitations on social gatherings would melt away. And it's all because of this Delta variant. That's why they're delaying things. I want to show you an animation of just how quickly that variant has spread across the UK. The map, you can see the darker the color, the higher proportion of that Delta variant. We know that it spreads 64% quicker than the previously dominant strain, the UK, or the Alpha variant, and it's accounting for about 90% of all of the new cases in the UK right now. And what's really concerning is vaccine efficacy. When it comes to people who just have one dose, myself included, the efficacy drops by about 17% when up against this new variant. Even for people with 2 doses, the efficacy still high, about 81%, but that's 7% lower than it would have been against the old strains. And what's especially concerning, Kate, is that a new study out just today shows that the new variant about doubles the risk of hospitalizations as well. So this 4-week buffer that this government is bringing in gives them a little bit more breathing room to get more shots in more arms, a second dose for older people, and at least some protection, 1 shot for younger people, Kate, which I should remind you that people under the age of 25 are still, by and large, not eligible to get even their first shot yet in this country.
Important note. Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate it. Joining me now for more on this is Dr. Chris Purnell. She's a public health physician and a fellow at the American College of Preventive Medicine. Scott laid out, doctor, kind of what is happening and coming in the UK right now because of the Delta variant. Just from your perspective, help us understand why the Delta variant is so particularly concerning, different from other variants, I would say, that the medical community has identified and flagged before.
Yes, Kate. There are 3 things that we want to be able to answer whenever we're considering any variant. And the first thing is it more infectious? You heard Scott talk about it's being more transmissible, upwards of 60% more transmissible. The second question we want to be able to answer, does it cause more severe disease? We don't have conclusive data on that yet, but if we look at what happened in India, we definitely have cause for concern. And then the third thing you want to be able to answer, do our currently available vaccines work? And as Scott also described, yes, they work, although it does evade the immunity somewhat.
Yeah, and on the point of vaccines, if folks see that the vaccines are slightly less effective against this COVID variant, someone's going to wonder, should I get a vaccine in the face of this? Does it mean it's not vaccines aren't protecting us at all against this variant? Help us with that.
No, it doesn't mean that. Remember, vaccines are most powerful because they prevent moderate and severe disease. What's severe disease? Hospitalization and even death. So if you have an 80% efficacy or effectiveness rate against this particular Delta variant, that's better than your natural immune system could do against it. So if that's the decision rubric or the decision point that people are considering, you're safer with the vaccine.
Yeah, maybe even more of a case to get the shot now that we can get this detail coming out. I want to play for you what former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb said about this variant.
This is going to take over, and I think the risk is really to the fall that this could spike a new epidemic heading into the fall. In parts of the country where you have less vaccination, particularly in parts of the South, where you have some cities where vaccination rates are low, there's a risk that you could see outbreaks with this new variant.
So what do you think all of this means for the United States then?
I agree. So through the summer, I think by and large we'll be safe. When I say we'll be safe, meaning that we won't have a widespread outbreak. Unvaccinated people, though, you don't have a different risk level for most parts, especially if you're living in geographic regions where a considerable part of the population isn't vaccinated. But once we go back into the fall and to the cooler temperatures and people go back indoors, that's when we need to know that we're protected. That's when those vaccines are going to matter more than ever.
Great point. Doctor, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
Coming up for us, President Biden declared.
Breaking news, the Attorney General Merrick Garland has just released a statement on the Trump Justice Department seizing a vast number of communications of the former president's political rivals, including members of the media, Democratic lawmakers. We also learned White House counsel Don McGahn and his wife. Let's get right to Evan Perez, Attorney General, clearly concerned about these practices. What's he going to do about it?
Yeah, Jim, this statement tells us that at least so far, despite the fact that the department has not said very much about what went on here, it's clear that there are things that they believe that were not done properly. And so that's the reason why you now are hearing from the Attorney General. He says, quote, there are important questions that must be resolved in connection with an effort by the department to obtain records related to members of Congress and congressional staff. He mentions that the Inspector General is now doing a review of this, but he also says that if during that process anything comes up that requires immediate attention, he says, I will not hesitate to move swiftly. He also mentions, Jim, the Attorney General mentions that the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, is now essentially doing a review to find any matters that should have a high-level review. In other words, what this tells me is that they believe, at least some of what we have been covering in the last few days with these records requests from members of Congress and staff and their family members, that there is something that was not done properly, that perhaps the high-level approvals that should have been done may not have been done. It appears, if you read between the lines of what the Attorney General is saying here, he believes that they're going to have to strengthen their processes to make sure that obtaining records of the legislative branch are done according to not only the rule of law, but also the Justice Department's own policies.
Does this, because a key question, you've had Sessions and Barr say, we know nothing about this. Based on what you're seeing here, is that possible? In other words, if practices weren't being followed, that it didn't go to the highest levels?
It's quite possible. I mean, look, there is one other person that we're still trying to figure out what if and what he knew, and that's Matt Whitaker. He was a acting Attorney General for a very, very brief period. But yes, I think it is quite possible that this is an investigation that began somewhere else, ends up rolling into getting these members of Congress's records, and the proper people at the highest level of the department weren't fully informed. That is a possibility that is being explored here.
We'll see what these probes come up with. Evan Perez, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Well, with every passing day, it does look less and less likely that the U.S. will reach President Biden's July 4th vaccine goal of having 70% of U.S. adults fully vaccinated. In the U.S. today, not far, 64% of U.S. adults have received at least one dose. I should say 70% having received at least one dose. Right now we're at 64%, 43% and a half or so fully vaccinated. But in 5 states, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Wyoming, fewer than half of adults have received one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Joining me now to break down the numbers, Harry Enton, CNN senior political writer and analyst. What's remarkable here, Harry, this split very definitively breaks down along party line. I mean, there's a direct red-blue state gap here with vaccination rates.
That's exactly right.